listening to the Christ Our Cornerstone podcast, a ministry of Christ Our Cornerstone Church in O'Neill, Nebraska. I'm Pastor Logan Merrick, and it's our prayer that this message strengthens your faith and draws you closer to Christ. Let's dive in. Hello, and welcome back to the Christ Our Cornerstone Church podcast. This is another mailbag, and I knew after my sermon this past week, which was called The Voices That Beg, and we got into a little bit about demonology, just a touch, and I shared that what I believe demons are, what I think is the biblical precedence for demons, and that is that they are the disembodied spirits of Nephilim. And I knew that it would cause some questions, which is good, and I'm glad. And so I had one of our members reach out, and they asked, well, what about the Sethite view? Because that's what I thought Genesis 6 was about, but I'm not sure what to do with Nephilim and all that jazz. And so this is a great question. And if you're not familiar with the Sethite view, that's okay. I'm going to give you what the Sethite view is in just a moment, but I will tell you that I held the Sethite view. There's actually 4 views of Genesis 6, and you may be going, what is Genesis 6? Well, I will read it. Let me grab a Bible here and turn to Genesis 6. It's a passage that specifically we as Americans in church don't like to wrestle with, and we don't hear a lot of sermons about it. But when you get into the nitty gritty of it and you actually get a biblical defense for Genesis 6, then you begin to see how all of Scripture makes sense. And here's Genesis 6, okay? Genesis 6, starting in verse 1, it says, when man began to multiply on the face of the land and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw that the daughters of man were attractive, and they took as their wives any they chose. Then the Lord said to him, my spirit shall not abide in man forever, for he is flesh. His day shall be 120 years. The Nephilim, so that's verse 4, the Nephilim were on the earth in those days and also afterward, when the sons of God came into the daughters of man, and they bore children to them. These were the mighty men who were of old, the men of renown. So what do we do with that? So let me go back. So again, I held to, for a very long time, the Sethite view, and there's 4 actual views. I won't go into the other 2 because they're just not, to me, they're not even close to being correct. And so I didn't want to take on the Nephilim, giants, angels cohabitating with humans view, because I felt it tapped too much into my charismatic Pentecostal upbringing of kookiness and weirdness. And I just wanted to put that stuff away. And it wasn't until I was graduating with my undergrad at Midwestern Baptist Theological Seminary that one of the professors came in and he just said, hey, read Genesis 6. This was literally like right before we're practicing for graduation. He comes in and he says, into a room, there's about 100 of us in this room. And he says, here's the 4 views of Genesis 6. You read Genesis 6, and then you tell me, you give me a defense for why that is. So I went into the view of Sethite view, mostly because when I read it in context, it feels like, it's going through the genealogy, it's going through creation, the creation account, the sin account, all that jazz. And we're getting all the genealogy. And then all of a sudden it's just like, boom, out of nowhere, it feels like, where in the world did this come from? And so for me, logically, I was going, all right, well, I'm going logically based on context. Well, something very interesting was all of the Hebrew scholar majors, those that specialized with their degree in the biblical languages, all held to the Nephilim, sons of God, divine council view. I will go into that in just a minute. And I couldn't understand it. And then slowly I just began to meet people. And then my Hebrew professor, which I will quote a lot of, Dr. Michael Heiser, reason being is because he, God rest his soul, he just passed away a year or two ago. But he was a conservative scholar. He's the brainchild behind Logos Bible software. But he's also the world leading expert on ancient languages. And so he was really influential for me to start to understand, the Bible is completely supernatural, and I can't just in my own discomfort sanitize it because it feels kooky. And he was famous for saying, in the weird parts of the Bible are not meant to be explained away, but they're important, and for us to truly dig in to understand it. And we should try to understand it from the standpoint of the way the ancient Hebrews and the early church, like how they understood it. And so the Sethite view would be this, that, it wasn't angels. Sons of God does not mean angels coming down and rebelling against God and having sex with women. It means sons of God, as in Seth, the biblical line of God, cohabitating with the daughters of Cain and creating another, what we would say is a sinful line, not a supernatural line, but just they were conceived in sin, right? So with that being said, that's the Sethite view. I take a very literal view of what the sons of God means, and I'm going to give you all the reasons why that is. And so the thing that I would say is most people hold to that interpretation of Genesis 6, not because it's biblical and is the most systematic. They hold to it really out of discomfort because they're like, no, that seems too kooky. That seems too much like Greek pantheon gods and all this stuff. And it's like, well, there's something to all that. And so what if the reason that we explain it the way that we do is because the text on its own feels like it's just too strange. And Genesis 6 is one of those passages that tend to be sanitized a lot, and we try to smooth it out and we try to make it safe, and we turn it into a moral lesson about dating the wrong people when that's not at all what it is. And it fractures the scriptures completely, because the seeds that we find out about in Genesis 3, when God talks about the seed of Eve and the seed of the serpent would be at odds. This comes down to it. And so you fracture the scriptures and you actually take portions of it out and you mess up a lot of what is actually happening to make the scriptures holistic. And so Genesis 6 isn't about intermarriage. It's not about marrying someone who's not a Christian, or for their sake, like a Jew, someone of a godly line. Like, that's not what it is at all. But it's actually about an invasion. Yes, I said an invasion, because on Mount Hermon, you have these angels who rebel, actual angels. They rebel against God, and they make a pact, and they see the daughters of men, and they're like, you know what, we're going to create our own seed. And what they're trying to do is circumvent Jesus coming, because they knew that God would have a seed. And so they're trying to circumvent that by creating their own seed. Now, I already can hear the pushback. I will get to all of that, but let me start here. Okay. So let's talk about why Genesis 6 is angels cohabitating with human women, and creating the Nephilim. And so we first have to look at the actual text. And so the meaning of B'nai Ha-Elohim, which that phrase itself, B'nai Ha-Elohim, means, that's Hebrew for sons of God. So throughout all of the Old Testament, that phrase is used consistently. You see it in Job, and it always refers to divine beings or members of a heavenly host. It doesn't refer to godly people or the line of Seth. It just doesn't. And so there is no clear place in the Hebrew Bible where sons of God refers to human beings, let alone the specific line of Seth. It's not there. In all of Scripture, it always refers to, you can look at Psalm 82, you can look at Job, like I said, everywhere it's always B'nai Ha Elohim, which refers to heavenly host, not humans. And so the Sethite view asks us to accept a meaning of the Scripture itself that it never uses. And that's a problem. We cannot look at Scripture and go, well, this makes me feel uncomfortable, or this is weird, and so therefore it must be this, and it's only this at this one time, and all the other places it refers to heavenly host. We can't do that. We have to be consistent in our interpretation. So that's the first thing. So B'nai Ha Elohim, what that means and where it's at in Scripture. So that's the first thing. Here's the second thing. Now we have to look at the structure of the text. Okay, so like I told you, I originally was looking at it in context going, okay, genealogies, blah, blah, blah. And then all of a sudden it feels like Genesis 6 comes out of nowhere. And it's like, what in the world is this, right? But we have to dig into where we're at in Genesis 6. And it says, now let's look at the structure of the text. Okay, you've got sons of God contrasted with the daughters of Adam, or the daughters of men, humanity. Okay. So if the author wanted to describe two human groups, he had the language to do it because it's right there. He could have just said the daughters of Cain. He doesn't do that. He could have also just said ungodly. I mean, it's all like he has the vocabulary to do so. Why would he use B'nai Ha Elohim, sons of God? He doesn't do that. He doesn't say daughters of Cain or the ungodly, the daughters of the ungodly, whatever. He doesn't do that. Instead, he contrasts when it reads naturally as divine beings with human women. That's just the plain reading of the text. Next, then you've got the Nephilim problem, okay? So then when you hit the whole thing of the Nephilim were on the earth in those days, right? This is where the Sethite view really breaks down. And the person that asked the question even said, like, I don't know what to do with the Nephilim then. Yes, because the Nephilim are a special breed that comes out of nowhere. Okay, God didn't make them. So here's the question. Why would the union of two groups of humans produce something abnormal in a whole new race of people? Christians marry non-Christians, or Christians will have sex with non-Christians. It still happens today. It's happened all throughout time. And we're not seeing giants being born. And we're not seeing people with 6 fingers and 6 toes be born. And so this is where it breaks down. So when the text says that it calls them Nephilim, it calls them Gibberoim or Gibberim, which just means mighty men or men of renown. What happens when you marry a believer and a non-believer? You don't create a super legendary figure that is incredibly strong, incredibly large, right? I remember I had a professor when I was asking, this was back when I was at a charismatic university, and he was over apologetics. And I said, what do we do with giants and all this stuff? And he's like, we still have giants today. And I'm like, we do? And he goes, yeah, like they're called the NBA. And it's like, what? No, man, like these people seem bigger than what we see today. And they are, because there are actual tombs and things that we have found that, I mean, even in Genesis where it talks about Og, right? And Moses kills Og, or is it Abraham or Moses? I can't remember right now, but they kill Og. Og is a giant. He is a king of giants. And it talks about his bed being 20 feet long. We know of tombs that are 14, 15, 16 feet long. Like this isn't just about NBA players. Okay. This is about huge people with huge strength. And so to get the Nephilim, you have to have some sort of supernatural, or I should say unnatural, blending of lines. Okay. So that's the next thing of why I hold to that. So here's another one. Let's talk about the New Testament confirmation. And I'm going to get to the pushback of, well, what about how angels can't have sex? Okay. I'm going to get to that. But the New Testament doesn't ignore this view either. So 2 Peter, it talks about how there were specific angels that sinned and were cast into Tartarus. Why would they be cast into Tartarus and already put to judgment? And they will face the second judgment, but they've already been cast. And why would Jesus go to hell and preach? Like, who's he talking to? Well, it seems like these angels, again, Mount Hermon, why would they have taken an oath together to commit this sin against God? Why would it only be these angels sent to Tartarus? What have they had done? In Jude, I'm going to read Jude. So Jude, verse 6. Oh man, I just lost my place. There we go. In Jude, it says this in verse 6. And the angels who did not stay within their own position of authority, but left their proper dwelling, he has kept in eternal chains under gloomy darkness until the judgment of the great day. And then don't miss the next verse. Just as Sodom and Gomorrah and the surrounding cities, which likewise indulged in sexual immorality and pursued unnatural desire, serve as an example by undergoing a punishment of eternal fire. Did you catch the very next verse? So Jude says that these angels left their proper dwelling, and then he immediately connects it to sexual immorality. That connection isn't just random. Like, it's there for a purpose. And so these authors aren't inventing something new. They're actually drawing from a shared understanding that is rooted in Genesis 6. It's not a breakdown of human genealogy. It's a supernatural rebellion. That's what this is. And so then we've got to do this. Okay, so if we have the Sethite view, if we hold the Sethite view, all right, why the flood then? The flood doesn't, like, if we just have intermarriage between an ungodly and godly person, the flood does not match. It just doesn't. So if we think about the flood and the Sethite view, the cause is intermarriage, right? But does that really justify the destruction of all flesh? In the supernatural view of Genesis 6, it represents something far more serious, right? A violation of the boundaries that God had established between heaven and earth, which is what Jude is talking about. When it says that they left let me make sure I get it right. They did not stay within their own position of authority, but left their proper dwelling. And then they take on these women. Okay. So it would make sense that you have a flood that is more than just a moral failure, because it's about a cosmic rebellion. And that helps explain the scale of the judgment, of why God is trying to get rid of all. And by the way, what does that mean for Noah? Why would Noah be, because Noah wasn't considered perfect. So why would Noah be the chosen one and his family? Because Noah was the only one, quote unquote, from a DNA perspective, considered perfect. He was a true human, and he followed after God. But how do we get giants after that? Well, if you think about the fact that you have Noah's sons and they had already had wives, you can still have that lineage being passed down. But that's for another time. But here's the biggest pushback, all right? Well, angels can't have sex. Jesus says that. In Matthew 22, verse 30, it says that angels, right? Angels, angels are spirits. That's what we say. Angels are spirits. They don't have bodies. And Jesus in Matthew says that they don't marry. Well, yeah, exactly. It says they don't marry. It doesn't say that they can't have sex. So I want you to notice, Jesus doesn't say angels are incapable. He just says they don't marry. That's not about their inability to do that. It's more about a role. They don't marry. They don't take unions together to procreate. They don't do that. They don't need to. An angel is a role. It is a job description. It's not a person. An angel just means messenger. And there's many different types of angels. There's many different levels to angels. We can see that in Isaiah and Jeremiah. We can see that in Job. We can see that in Ezekiel. There's different types of angels. They look different. And so that's what you have to understand is when you use the term angel, it's you're doing a job description. You're not describing a person. It's like saying a garbage man. If you said garbage man to describe a human, that doesn't make much sense, right? And so it's not about an inability to procreate. And Jude 6 tells us, or Jude 1:6, I should say, tells us that these angels left their proper domain. So whatever happened in Genesis 6, it involves stepping outside of what God intended. But then we've got to talk about, but they're not physical beings. Okay, well, hold on. Let's talk about the physical nature of spiritual beings. Here's something that we tend to miss, which is why I said this week, why I believe that demons are disembodied spirits of Nephilim, not of fallen angels. Okay. In scripture, when spiritual beings appear, they are physical. In Genesis 18, they eat. In Genesis 19, the men of Sodom want to sleep with them. And there's a whole thing I can go down with that on why they want to. But there's no confusion about what they are. They see them as physical. The Bible doesn't present spiritual beings as intangible clouds. Even Jesus, in his resurrected body, is physical. He eats. They touch him. They can feel him. They can interact with the physical world. So the idea of them taking on a physical form is not foreign to the text of Genesis 6. It's only foreign to us because it feels weird, right? So at the end of the day, the objection often comes because we're trying to force a modern category onto an ancient worldview. So we hear spirit and assume non-material, but the scripture doesn't operate that way. If God can take on flesh, then clearly the line between spiritual and physical is not as rigid as we tend to think that it is. Okay, like they're not a mist. And so the issue in Genesis 6 isn't whether it was possible. The issue is that it was forbidden. And so when you begin to see that, the scriptures begin to unfold a whole lot more. So when we talk about the authority of Jesus and what he has given to us, it begins to make a whole lot more sense when he says, all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me, and I now give it to you. Like that is the crux of all of scripture. And so here's the bottom line. The Sethite view doesn't arise naturally from the text. It's a reaction to it. And it actually comes from the 14th century, by the way. Like that's when it began to come around because the early church held to a Genesis 6 view. That's also why Moses doesn't give us this long diatribe about Nephilim and whatever, because his readers would have already known what they are. They would have already known the story. They've seen giants themselves. Like they know all this stuff. It's just us in the modern world that goes, this is weird. And so we attempt to make it comfortable and more explainable so it's less supernatural. But Genesis 6 isn't trying to be comfortable for us. It's showing us a world where rebellion isn't just human, it's cosmic. It's something different. It's out of this world. And if we flatten that, we might be missing out on something that the original authors fully expected us to see. And if we flatten it, we put the scripture in parts and then hope that it makes sense. And you can't do that. We have to see it through the lens with which it was given to us and read it that way through an ancient lens, not a modern lens. Okay. So let me give you some resources that you can go read yourself. Okay. So I talked about this past Sunday, The Unseen Realm by Dr. Michael Heiser. I'm going to just tell you, Dr. Heiser is not an easy read because most of his books are a lot of footnotes that are deep. Like half the page will literally be footnotes because he's just pointing you to scripture over and over and over and over and over and over and over. He's pointing you to scripture and ancient text over and over because he's giving you all the evidence for this. It's not just his take. It is the actual, like this is what it says. Here's you see it for yourself. He also has a book called Reversing Hermon, which is about that rebellion that I talked about. It's a more focused look specifically on Genesis 6 and its implications in the New Testament. He wrote an easier kind of read that of the unseen realm called Supernatural. It's just a simplified version of the unseen realm. It's probably a good starting point for those of you that feel like I don't really want to get into a textbook per se. First Enoch. Now, Pastor Logan, Enoch is not in the Bible. I know. And I'm not saying it's canon, but it is quoted by Jude, and it is quoted by Peter, and it is quoted by Paul. Okay. So there has to be something to it. Now, the first 32 chapters, I think, are more on point. The rest of it is trash that was added later and blah, 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 blah. Okay. But at least just familiarize yourself with it. I'm not saying it's scripture. Don't hear me saying it's scripture. Okay. But it does get quoted by the writers of scripture. So we should at least familiarize ourselves with it. It also helps us how ancient Jews would have interpreted Genesis 6. Now, what if we wanted to have something that's more balanced? Okay. You've given us a lot about Dr. Michael Heiser. Yeah. Cause he was my professor, and he's an incredible man who loved the Lord, loved Jesus, always pointed us to Christ, very biblical, always pointed us to the Bible. And I just got the chance to interact with him personally. So I trust him in that. But let me give you another one. The Genesis 6 Conspiracy by Gary Bates gives you the contrasting perspectives that critique both views. There's a book called Giants, Sons of the Gods. And it's by Douglas Van Dorn, who is a conservative pastor in Denver. And he gives you a really in-depth look at Nephilim, giants, all that jazz. And then there's a book called Demons by Dr. Michael Heiser as well, which explores how Genesis 6 connects to later biblical demonology, which is what I got into this past week. So all that being said, I hope that this was helpful. I hope that it makes you want to dive a little bit deeper, but hopefully helps you see, the Bible is more supernatural than I thought. I'm not expecting this to change your mind. I want you to be the one that physically dives in yourself. You physically dive in yourself to see what it is that the scriptures are about. Your systematic interpretation of the scriptures, your defense of where you are, but don't ever let your own discomfort be the reason why that you are unwilling to take the Bible at face value, because that's just not being honest. So keep asking questions, keep searching the scriptures, because that's what a good believer does. I love each and every single one of you. Thanks so much for listening. If you've got any more questions, always reach out to me. Text me, message me on Facebook, email me. You know how to get a hold of me. Love you guys. We'll see you. Hopefully you can join me. If you are not a part of Christ Our Cornerstone Church, we are in O'Neill, Nebraska, and would love to have you come visit us anytime. Thanks so much. Have a great day. We'll see you Sunday. Bye-bye.